Okay, so my name is Jeff Hartley. I'm a government affairs consultant, which is a sexy way to say I'm a dirty lobbyist. I represent oil and gas. I also represent Rocky Mountain Power and a variety of other interests in the state of Utah. I primarily work with state interests. I do a little bit of federal work, but primarily work on state issues. And that's because you can get things done in the state of Utah. I'm glad to see that the University of Utah football ticket holders have left the building and headed back for the game because the audience is smaller and less intimidating. So let me start by saying 3 cheers for Andrew Becerra. Is he still here? Did Andrew leave? Thank you to Andrew and his enthusiasm to change NEPA, FLPMA, the Endangered Species Act, and all those other bad laws, and he's only got 2 years before Rob Bishop is done, and who knows what happens with the control of power in Washington, so Godspeed, Andrew, that's great. 3 cheers for Robert Rapier. Is it Rapier? Did I say that right? Did Robert leave? Anyway, and his fake peak oil presentation, that was awesome. And then my new favorite term, entrepreneurial socialists. How about that? And 3 cheers for all of you for the $32 million that you have produced for SITLA to give to the school children of Utah. That's awesome. $32 million from oil and gas. Now, I'm going to echo what Dave here said because I'm a big fan of the educational effort that they're making to reach out to the school kids and help them understand the importance of carbon energy because it's about the hearts and minds. Because I have kids in school, and my son who just graduated and my second son who's now a freshman, what year is he? I think he's a freshman. They've both done reports in school on fracking, and they've both done reports in school on fracking because in their classes they were being taught nonsense about how dangerous fracking is, and they would come home and say, "Dad, my teacher's saying all this stuff about fracking." So I would, put them on a path to doing research and doing a report to give them good information for their teachers. And it's important that kids get good information because we'll lose the hearts and minds, and then we'll be facing bad policy from the next generation. So with that petition, that's not what I'm here to talk about. Most of you will recognize the map on the screen in the corner there, the oil and gas, and that's an old representation. The green dots and the red dots are probably more prolific than they are in this one, but that's the one that I had available to me. So currently, when we talk about transportation in the state of Utah for oil and gas, we talk about truck, we talk about pipelines, we talk about rail, but that's not what I was asked to talk about. This is a map of the blue shaded area is the Salt Lake International Airport, and that is the expanded footprint of the airport. That pretty yellow star is where the new prison is going to be built. And the reason that is relevant is because all of that land that is between the airport and where that prison is going to be built is open space. And it's rare in a metropolitan area like Salt Lake City to have so much undeveloped open land available. There's between 3,500 and 4,000 acres of developable land there, and there's infrastructure that is being put in by the state for that prison. And the reason the prison is being put out there is because where the current state prison is, it was put in Draper before there were many people in Draper, and since then civilization's built up to the edge of the prison, like often happens, and so they decided to move the prison, and that location is on the edge of what is buildable, and to the left, as you look at it, is the Great Salt Lake. And so you're on the edge of what can be built. You're not where residential development would ever encroach upon the prison, so you won't have an issue where people are building up to the prison. But you could have industrial development, which is what the state wants to see. This is, you can see I-80 along, running horizontally below that open piece of ground, Interstate 80. And then if you follow it to the right side of the image, you can see Interstate 15 running north and south. And so you have our international airport, you have your crossroads of two major interstates, and you see the black lines in there as well. That's rail. It services that area. So I was asked today to talk about a state initiative that is called the Inland Port, which is something that was introduced a couple of years ago as a concept, which is relatively new to the state. This is a picture of a port. This is actually the port of Singapore that I took a couple days ago. That's a busy port. Lots of containers, lots of ships, but it's got an ocean. That's looking just to the side of it. Lots of activity. It's the second busiest port in the world, second after Hong Kong. A lot of the goods that are shipped to the U.S. go through the port of Singapore. They transload there, so goods materials that are produced in Asia go to Singapore, and they get organized into containers for common destinations and transloaded, and then put on barges, and they go to Long Beach, they go to Oakland, they go to L.A., or they'll go to the East Coast because those ports are busy. But we don't have an ocean, so I'd like to introduce you to the largest dredging project since the C&O Canal was built. We're going to take that Great Salt Lake, and we're going to dig a canal. No, we're inland, we don't have access to an ocean, so the concept of an inland port is different, but it's not unique to Utah. There are, in fact, several inland ports, and an inland port is defined as a site located away from traditional land, air, and coastal borders, but it needs to have strong transportation assets that can allow goods to get to that port. So Savannah, Georgia has a river that accesses from the ocean. Brownsville, Texas, they built a 17-mile channel from the Gulf of Mexico to get to theirs. But Columbus, Ohio has an inland port. Greer, South Carolina, they rail it from Charleston. Charlotte, North Carolina is accessed by rail, and Dallas, Texas also has an inland port accessed by rail from the Gulf. So it's not a new concept. We would be, 700 miles from the coast. But the concept is that you would create a mechanism where goods can be offloaded from barges, and rather than go through the hassle of clearing customs, where they sometimes have to wait a week at Long Beach in the queue to get unloaded and go through the customs houses to clear customs, and then get transloaded and go to their various destinations in the U.S. A barge could hit the port, keep the containers sealed, get on trains, and go to an inland location that is controlled by customs, and there have the containers opened up, cleared by customs, and go to the various destinations. So you could create a hardened environment in Salt Lake City where those containers could be opened up and redistributed. And if you think about the geography of where Salt Lake City sits, it makes a lot of sense because we have access to a lot of regional areas. So here, this is a map of ports that are at the common shipping ports for the U.S. And some data points about Utah and why the state's having this conversation. Oh, there we go. Utah is the fourth fastest growing export state in the U.S. A lot of people don't know that, but our exports are growing. That includes precious minerals, rare earth elements, but it also includes a lot of agriculture products. We're exporting a lot of grain to Asia. We're exporting coal to Asia. We export other goods that are manufactured in the U.S. International trade is becoming a more and more important component to the state's economy, and an inland port would make Utah an attractive location for major manufacturers. So an inland port in Utah would offer the centralized location because you can get to the Midwest or to anywhere in the Rocky Mountain states or to the West Coast by truck in one shift of a driver's hours. So in a 12-hour shift that a long-haul trucker can run, or by train or by air, you can get from Salt Lake City in a short amount of time. You can get distribution points from Salt Lake. We have multimodal transportation hub because we have I-80, I-15, I-70 all crossing in Utah. And we have both Union Pacific and Burlington Northern who will service Utah. So two Class 1 railroads that come through Utah and service that area, in addition to our international airport, all in one location. And we have favorable labor costs, especially compared to Long Beach, where they go on strike and shut things down because they want more money. We're a right-to-work state, and our labor costs are lower, and that is attractive to those who ship things, and our energy costs are low. So the estimates that have been done peg the economic savings to those who ship at around 15%. If they would, even though you'd have additional cost to get it to Salt Lake, the savings would be about 15% if you use Salt Lake as an inland port, and that's why we're having that conversation. So here you see the interstate crossroads of the west and the rail crossroads of the west. Roads, rail. Makes a lot of sense if you're moving goods and services, or goods anyway. So again, we have all that open space that's available to us that we can utilize. If you look on this map, you can't see it very well, but if you look at the rectangle of the blue shaded area that's the airport expansion, along that running up and down or north and south, there's a orange stitch line, and I'm sorry you can't see it very well, but there's an orange stitch line. There's a pipeline there called the UNAV pipeline, Utah Nevada pipeline. That's finished refined product, jet fuel that goes to Nevada. That corridor is a wide corridor. It's wide enough that, and it's already permitted for a pipeline, it's wide enough that you could run more pipe in that corridor. So there's been a discussion about running pipeline from the rail on the bottom there along I-80, those black lines, and running a rail line up along the UNAV pipeline to feed the refineries. So you could bring in crude by rail to that point where that open land is. You could create a transloading facility and run oil up to the refineries rather than bringing in so many trucks. It relieve some of the truck pressure, relieve the waiting time that trucks face, and the road pressure on 40. And I don't know how many of you sat in line waiting for road construction on your way out here, but I know I took a nap in Daniels Canyon. So here's one of the configurations that was mocked up. Again, if you consider that open space that it's just to the left or to the west of that industrial park attached to the airport. Here's just a conceptual configuration of what an inland port could look like. The orange or reddish lines are roads, and the white lines would be rail, where you could bring in by rail a lot of container cars, and you'd have warehousing and storage facilities where you could clear customs, and where you could then have manufacturing as well that would feed into this and grow an economy that the state doesn't currently have. Just a different configuration. And again, it's kind of open because all that land's barren right now. And so the state's been studying this. They're looking at the cost of infrastructure. It's likely that legislation will come forward in January to address putting some of this to work. So why are we talking about that here? Again, that pipeline potential, that corridor potential, would allow oil by rail to be piped up to the refineries. This is a slide. Some of you may have seen this idea discussed elsewhere. The seven county coalition has a study going right now to look at a pipeline that would run from Mighton down to Carbon County for oil, that would allow oil to get to rail down in Carbon County. That's represented by that blue line. If that proves feasible, you could have oil that would go by pipeline from the basin to Carbon County. It could go by rail, existing rail. It wouldn't need new rail. It could go by existing rail from Carbon County back to Salt Lake, and you could relieve some of the truck traffic that is represented by the red line. And then you could deliver oil. There is a feasibility study that needs to be done still. Estimates have it pegged as being slightly more expensive than existing trucking, and at current costs. As you all know, when oil was north of $100 a barrel, trucking costs were higher too, but that's a feasibility study that hasn't been done yet. But that's the idea, and that's why it's relevant to our discussions here today over energy. So again, in this area, you could have an energy hub, and it could include storage. It could include storage in rail cars, which they're doing a lot of right now. The refineries, every refinery in North Salt Lake has oil being stored in rail cars right now. But you could have tanks out there. You could have a transfer facility, and you could have pipeline. Here's the challenge of that whole area, and this is what the state's trying to address right now. All those different colors in those different squares represent different owners of the land in that area. So that land's not owned by the state. It's mainly owned by private entities. And so getting everyone on the same page and coming up with a master plan of how you would develop this is really the tricky part. And then creating the governing authority, some type of port authority to govern it, is a challenge. But there is a proposal to create such a port authority. Its focus would be on manufacturing, light industrial, warehousing, storage, and global distribution. Some of the challenges or issues that it would need to address would be the highway and surface streets, commercial and rail and trucking, air cargo integration, infrastructure, energy storage and pipelines, and mass transit and light rail from that airport along the west bench of Salt Lake County. As that grows, we're going to need better transit corridors, including mass transit. So here's what we're really talking about. Utah, we like to call ourselves a crossroads of the West, but really what we're trying to build is a crossroads of the world. And that's why the state's talking about having an inland port. And that's my presentation. Thanks for listening.